Captain America is definitely a very interesting character whose history in film has actually been almost as long as his history in comics. Before the MCU, there was actually a 1990 film.
Mr. President! Thanks.
And before that, there were 2 TV movies in 1979. And before that, all the way back in 1944, there was a black and white serial. To just kind of hop right into the review for this serial, just to give you some historical context, the character Captain America was actually created during World War II kind of as propaganda, which is interesting because now in all the modern storylines they have it to where the character actually was made in World War II and then he froze in ice and then woke up in the modern times. But when the character was first actually new, they didn't have to do anything with him freezing and waking up because it actually was the World War II time period. And so this serial came out shortly after Captain America became a character in the comics. And if you don't know what a serial is, basically back in the day they would play double features at the movie theater, and in between them they would play an episode of a serial. They'd be like 15 or so minutes. And so it's not really a TV show because it was on the big screen and not TV, but it's basically a TV show. And there are actually a few Marvel and DC heroes whose first appearances were in these low budget serials. So if you can imagine, they're not really that good compared to today's standards. But when it comes to this serial in particular, I actually think by those standards, which are low standards, this is one of the better ones. There's actually some pretty solid action throughout, and the story is at least somewhat intriguing. Now, there are cliffhangers at the end of every episode that are just really dumb though. Like for example, in some of the episodes, Captain America will be in a building, and then it explodes, but then at the beginning of the next episode, it'll play the same clip, but it'll show him escaping before it explodes. And so just in that regard, it's not anything too creative that they did. However, visually, with some of the costume design and set pieces here, it does seem pretty good for 1940s serials. And most of them, like the Batman ones, you can tell the budget is super low. And I don't know if this necessarily had a bigger budget or if they just put that budget to good use. But they did a good job of there being these different environments that the characters are in that feel unique from one another. And so I definitely do have to give it credit for that.
I was surprised with it. I was actually pleasantly surprised.
Weirdly enough though, Captain America in this serial is actually not Steve Rogers. They just completely changed his character to this district attorney named Grant Gardner, and Captain America is basically his alter ego, and he's essentially just like Batman. Also, instead of him having the shield in this, he just carries around a gun. So while some of his personality isn't too far off, the actual character is just very different from pretty much every other interpretation. Now, I will say when it comes to the side characters, they are a little bit more memorable than you would expect. Especially the love interest here, Gail Richards, who actually wasn't a character from the comics, but they later on made her a character in like the Ultimate comics. And the main villain in here isn't really someone from the comics, but he is kind of memorable just because of his monocule. In most of these types of serials, I have a problem with all of these different characters look exactly the same because they all wear the stereotypical 1940s clothing and they all have like the same haircut. But this serial did do a good job of some of the different characters just looking different with their clothing. And don't get me wrong, you get some of them mixed up, but for the most part, they just did a pretty good job of that. And as I said, throughout the serial, there's just some pretty interesting stuff they do with the story and the action, and it actually has a somewhat exciting final battle. And so just overall, at the end of the day, while this is not really anything that great, when you compare it to other superhero serials from this time period, it's better than most of them. So overall, on the quality scale of 0 to 100, I'll give it a 59%. And if you're interested in checking this out, you can definitely find it on YouTube. Some people have playlists with all the episodes, and some people have just one long video where they mash it together. And obviously, you don't have to watch it all. You can just watch like one episode and just kind of get an idea of what it's like. But if you have seen it, let me know what you think about it in the comments section down below. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.